Oh, hello there. Welcome to another Whiskey Me live tasting here, August, what is the date? August 18th? Yeah, August 18th, 2022. The weather has finally broken. It's no longer boiling hot outside, so I'm hoping we're going to get reasonable attendance to our tasting tonight, as hot weather and long evenings does not play well with live Whiskey Me tastings at 8 p.m. So settle down. We've got two fantastic whiskies to taste this month. We'll be starting off with Jura 7-Wood, which is our featured Scotch whisky this month, where we'll be joined by Mark Bruce from Jura Distillery. He's literally in Jura Distillery. He's probably one of only about 200 people on that island at the moment. And still he can't get a good internet connection. And then we've also got Lee Morgan from Penderyn Distillery, who's going to be talking us through Penderyn Portwood, which is, of course, our world whiskey. If you're a World Whiskey subscriber and you're waiting for that, you've only got about 10 minutes to wait while Mark and I talk a bit of Jura. So make yourself a cup of tea or listen to a little bit about Jura, which we're going to do right now. So introducing Mark Bruce. Hey, Mark.
Hello, mate. How are you? Okay.
Yeah, good. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you. All good.
How's the weather on Jura? It seems like the most sort of obvious question. You're in the Hebrides there. Is it blowy? Is it wet? Is it windy? Is it cold? Is it hot?
It's been everything you can possibly imagine right up until now, and the sun is shining and the sunset's coming down. So yeah, it's all looking really good right now. Yeah.
Oh my God, I've been lucky enough to visit once before, and it's at Craighouse there, the sort of main town on the island where the distillery and basically where everything is just unbelievably beautiful. I was taken aback, couldn't believe it, how gorgeous it was.
Exactly, and as he said, sort of Craighouse is by far the biggest and perhaps I wouldn't say only, but one of very few villages on the island, and it's where the majority of the 230 people that live here on Jura currently reside, within sort of like a 3-mile radius, if you will, which is either up or down along the one single road which runs along the east side of the island. So yeah,
it's pretty cool. Do you live there?
I do, yeah. I've lived here for best part of 2.5 years now. And my partner and I moved up here from London. You should recall a number of nights I've spent in your bar in Shoreditch, which was a big part of, I guess, my inspiration and love of the world of whiskey. So, sort of being able to head into BlackRock and enjoy the spoils of the industry that we work in really inspired me to take on this opportunity and come up to Jura and have a great time.
Oh, well, that's amazing that we're now gone full circle and I get to talk to you from your new home in Jura about Jura whiskey. It's cool.
That's right. Yeah, it's all good, man.
Cool. Well, maybe for anyone who's not that familiar with the distillery or the island, perhaps you can give us a bit of a primer on maybe where Jura is geographically and what it is geographically, and also where the whiskey sits within the sort of geography of the whiskey category, if you like.
Yeah, no problem. So for those of you that don't know, we are situated off the west coast of Scotland, about 60 miles directly west from Glasgow. So it's not overly far in terms of distance, but to get here, it's not the easiest of places to travel to, right? And you'll know this, you've been here before. 2 ways or 3 ways, depending on how much money you've got. But most people come in via a small little plane out of Glasgow into Islay, explore the riches of Islay and all those wonderful distilleries over there. And when they find the time, they come across to experience Jura. And it couldn't be any more different. It really is something quite unique. From the moment you arrive on the island, you'll find yourself somewhat isolated and surrounded by best part of 6,000 deer that live side by side with just over 230 people here on the island at the moment. And you sort of travel along the one road. There's only one road that runs from sort of the moment you arrive all along the coast of the island right up to the north end. And within about 7 or 8 miles of arriving on Jura, you run into the village of Craighouse. And this is where you'll, of course, find our distillery on your left-hand side. Perhaps the most important building of all on your right-hand side, which is the pub and hotel. One of the best ranges of Jura whiskey you'll find, I think, in the world, if you ask me that. And everything that sort of supports life here on the island. So, you know, you've got to appreciate the fact that it is a small population. It's very remote. So we do rely entirely upon the fact that we have the distillery, we have the pub, we also have the local community store, we've got the post office, we've got a wonderful little cafe, and you know, the doctor's surgery, and of course the school as well. So a lot is happening in a very, very small sort of area of the island, which brings everything to life when you come and visit us here on Jura.
Amazing. It's like world in miniature. But I think the thing is, the island's not small by the sort of standard of sort of Scottish West Coast islands, right? It's, you know, there are much smaller islands there, I guess, with more people on, eh?
That's really true. I guess what sort of makes us somewhat special is that everyone is living within a really, really small area. To give you an idea, I guess, in terms of length of the island, you would be probably running from south to north. Well, I could be really wrong here, but I'd like to have a guess at something like 50 to 60 miles, sort of bottom to top. And then at its widest point, which you can walk, if you've got the time and the energy, it's a gorgeous walk out to the west side. You're looking at about 6 to 7 miles east to west as well. And as you head out there, you're sort of hugging the side of the east side of the Paps, which of course, you being a runner, you should be familiar with the fact that it's one of the more challenging runs in the annual races here in Scotland.
Yeah, well, they do a Jura Fell race, don't they? Which I think is about 30 kilometers, and you go up all three. There's 3 Paps in total, right? But 2 of them.
3 Paps, 7 hills. That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's 30 kilometers, and it's a round trip from Craighouse, and it looks really tough. I've not done it, but when I was over before, I did attempt to run up one of the Paps, and didn't manage it because the path just kind of ran out.
Yeah, you've almost got to find your own way, right? Yeah. But
exactly,
Tristan, as a friend of ours and as a close partner, all you need to do is ask the question. So if you want to take it on next year, you want to train for it, just let us know, and we'll make that happen.
Maybe we'll do that. That's for sure. The problem will be resisting drinking all the whiskey the night before. But I'm up for a trip to Jura, even if it means I've got to bust a gut running 30k. So that's the geography, very well explained. Where do you feel like Jura sits within the whiskey category, like the broad sort of Scotch whiskey category? Because it's an island distillery, but island whiskies tend to be peated, some of them heavily peated, and it's not that. Oh, it's not typically that anyway. So what's the sort of identity of the whiskey, do you feel?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and over the years, perhaps Jura whiskey has kind of found itself playing between both, you know, peated and unpeated, which has been really interesting at times, but perhaps somewhat difficult to understand from the general consumer's perspective, which is where we do play, you know, solidly. We do really, really well in. We tend to sort of work along the lines of the fact that the heavily peated, the really, really smoky stuff, we leave that to the experts on Islay. There's a wonderful number of distilleries on Islay, which many people come to visit every single year in, year out. And we take inspiration from those guys. We work with smoke to a certain extent, but the majority of what we are doing here is entirely unpeated. When we are working with smoke, we're incorporating very small amounts of it into our whiskey. At the blending stage, and you should be able to pick some of this up in the 7-wood across the majority of the core range. And if I was to put a number on it, I would perhaps say that the amount of smoke or the amount of peat incorporated into our whiskey extends from anything from nothing all the way up to perhaps 11 or 12%, depending on the SKU.
Mm. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess then we're looking at a kind of lighter style of island whiskey. not lighter necessarily, but less sort of punchy in the peat respect.
Sure.
Which, you know, I mean, I guess Aaron kind of falls into that category as well. It's not the only one. Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think sometimes people just expect island whiskies or even Western Highland whiskies to be quite robustly smoky and, you know, quite sort of boisterous in their characteristic. And Jura's never really been that for me.
No, it hasn't. And if you were to retrace our history and you go back to the fact that the distillery was established in 1810 and it ran fairly well right up until about 1900, 1901. It closed and ultimately sort of fell apart in 1920 when we removed the roof from the distillery to avoid paying taxes at the time, and everything falls down. I always talk about the fact that if you were to pull a roof off a house on the mainland, it would fall down in, you know, years to come. Here on Jura, it falls down in about 5 or 10 minutes, right? The weather out here is pretty wild in the winter, particularly. When you sort of fast forward to the reopening of the distillery in the early 60s, it was all about sort of creating a very light, fruity style of spirit that could be sold off easily into the big blending houses at the time. And William Delmay Evans, who had worked on a couple of distilleries in years gone by, really brought that approach into the distillery. And we've kept that right up until this day. In fact, we've just recently replaced 3 of the pots of our 4 stills, and nothing has changed. We are, of course, home to some of the tallest pot stills that you'll find in Scotland, allowing us to produce a really light, fruity style of new make spirit. And we are incredibly proud of that and plan to continue that for, you know, many, many years to come. From what I've been told, there's absolutely no plans to change any of that.
That's good. I think one of the things I think you agree that sort of started to become a sort of fingerprint or an identity of the distillery in recent times is a more kind of more kind of interest in different wood types and exploration into cask management and that kind of thing, and in-house blending of different types of barrel. And obviously that's exemplified in 7 wood, which, as the name suggests, is 7 different types of wood, which I mean, you got a lot of whiskies out there that are finished in, you know, whatever it might be. We're going to taste Penderyn Portwood shortly, which is 2 different types of wood, ex-bourbon and port casks. But 7 different types of wood is quite a kind of, well, it must be quite a challenge and it's quite ambitious. So let's talk a little bit about what the sort of thought process behind that and what types of wood they are and what we can expect that to contribute to the whiskey.
Sure. So the thinking and the project itself goes all the way back to something that Richard Patterson was working on more than 10 years ago. And as a business, we were fortunate enough to introduce Greg Glass into the world of White Mackay. And Greg had really sort of set a name for himself, created a name for himself over at Compass Box. And you'll probably be very familiar with Greg and sort of the way he works. And he's almost like this Willy Wonka style workbench kind of bloke who approaches everything with an open mind and a real sort of energy and excitement to what can be created and really pushing the boundaries of whiskey. He worked alongside Richard Patterson in the early days, and as part of his development, as part of bringing him into White Mackay, was all about allowing him to take the reins of Jura whiskey and a number of our other distilleries that sit within our family. And Jura 7 Wood is perhaps a real wonderful example of what Greg is capable of doing. He applied that thought process to this whiskey, and it's all about celebrating the different influences of wood that are coming from 6 different regions of France. So Jura 7 Wood is referring to the fact that a lot of this whiskey is initially matured in American white oak, ex-bourbon, and then it goes on to being finished or matured, portions of this whiskey then being matured in woods that have come from regions of France. And we're talking about Limousin, Vosges, Allier, Trançay, and a number of other different parts of France. And each of those regions are contributing a different characteristic to the whiskey. And the one thing I really, really enjoy about Sevenwood is that depending on my mood, depending on the day of the week, depending on how, we're all feeling, it shows me something different, which is really quite exciting, because we produce a really light, fruity style of spirit. It pairs perfectly well, or marries perfectly well, with ex-bourbon, good quality American white oak. And then when you sort of take a proportion of that out and start to mature it in Quercus Roba from these separate regions, it shows you something else within all the different casks. And then Greg's job is to bring all of that together and to bring it into something which is really quite enjoyable. ABV is slightly higher than what you would normally expect within our core range, which generally sits at about 40%. And it puts a little bit of a spine behind the whiskey. But again, there's so much to explore. So whether you're having this on its own, adding a little bit of water, or mixing it in a cocktail, it's an incredibly versatile whiskey that we've got in the range.
Yeah, I remember when I came to Jura, it was not long after Sevenwood had launched. I guess about 5 years ago, not sure.
Yeah, 5 years, yeah.
Yeah, and we got to taste some of the samples from the different French casks
Nice.
in sort of isolation on their own. Possibly got to taste something from every single cask, plus obviously just Sevenwood before it leaves bourbon cask. And it's crazy what those different casks contribute to the whiskey. Quite wildly different things, even though they're all French oak barrels, Quercus Roba, like you say. And then, of course, the sort of marvel of the whole thing is blending all of that together. Like I say, that it's so ambitious to sort of, lucky number 7, I guess, right? That's the sort of, that's where you aim for 7, but it's a major sort of plate spinning, balancing act thing there to make sure you're representing each of those barrels in some way in the final product. And I totally agree with you. Every single time I taste it, I'm like, oh no, there's something else here this time that I've not got before. And I guess that's reflective of those sort of 6 French oak barrels in the finished product.
Yeah, and it's a really exciting project that is continuing to evolve. You've got to think of it in a way that this is where it started and where could it go. The fact that Greg and now Joe Ricketts, the blender coming in behind him, are heading out there, a couple of times a year to work with the Coopers, to work with forest management teams and to really sort of push the future of what we're doing in terms of sustainability and getting everything we possibly can out of the wood, and also ensuring that each of the businesses and the people that we're working with are all benefiting from it as a project, as an entirety. So I've always been a big fan of Sevenwood. In fact, I think it may have been maybe not the last time, but the second last time I was in Black Rock. There was a bit of filming being done with Daryl Haldane, who used to work with us, and Tom, your business partner, and a piece being centered around sort of opening this whiskey up to the world of cocktails. And that really got me sort of thinking about the versatility of the whiskey, which was, really, really quite exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Well, actually, Jura Sevenwood was the launch party, or the UK launch party, or the English launch party, maybe, was in Black Rock, and we were lucky enough to host that. And the launch of the 18.
You would have met Graham, right? Our distillery manager.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he hosted that. And Daryl. Yeah. Right. Let's go. Let's taste it. And we're going to bring in Lee as well, because he's got some Sevenwood in a glass in front of him, I think. So welcome, Lee from Penderyn.
Hello there, guys. Hello there.
How you going?
Thanks for patiently waiting. Glad you got Jura in front of you. So let's have a little taste. I'm going to just get a whole bottle, a large bottle. So I'm going to pour a little bit more out because I've been sipping away on it anyway. And let's see what we can taste today. Mark, do you want to kind of lead the tasting, see what you can smell and taste on this occasion?
Yeah, of course. So I guess I benefit from the fact that I've spent a bit of time trying some of the new make. And the new make, when it runs off the stills here, is incredibly light, super fruity, super bright, loads of fun, lots to look for. And we pair that deliberately with American white oak to drive the sweetness and just sort of set the texture and set the background. And the European oak allows us to sort of draw out additional flavors. I always look for very simple characteristics, and I take this from a colleague of mine, Stephen Martin, who talks about whiskey in colors and yellow and orange, right? And anything that's yellow and orange, you really can't go wrong. Green and red, I think, as well within the Seven Woods. So depending on how you're feeling, depending on the mood, a little bit of spice behind the whiskey as well. So we can talk about, banana, apricot, peach, orange, all those sorts of wonderful things wrapped up in a sweetness, cinnamon, vanilla, sort of nutmeg, all those sorts of things. You may find if you're really in the mood for this, a little bit of licorice and a few sort of secondary and almost tertiary notes as well in the background. So lots to look for.
I think.
Come on, Lee. Isn't that me? What have you got?
Yeah, I think it's really fantastic. And I've got to admit, this isn't the first time I have encountered this whiskey either. I have had it a number of times before. I think it's really interesting when you're pulling from all those different regions of France, and I do find those notes of almost cognac coming through. We're matured in similar sort of ways. You get that expression of French oak coming through in that same way, but obviously with more of a sweet whiskey base.
I think the stone fruit thing is something that I always get from Sevenwood, and sometimes it's like apricot, sometimes it's slightly more peachy, sometimes it's like nectarine. But to me today, it's really quite apricotty. And I think when you said like yellow and orange, yeah, it's all those things. Apricot. You don't get more yellow than an apricot. It's the most yellow thing in the world, apart from a chicken. You ever notice that chickens aren't even yellow? But anyway.
No, and I think just Tristan, you were sort of talking about, asking before about where we sit in the category. And I think Jura whiskey is all about making it accessible to anyone and everyone. We want people from all sorts of backgrounds, no matter where you're from, what you do, what you say you are, how are you feeling, all the rest of it, to engage with the brand. We are doing incredibly well in terms of growth around the world, which is wonderful. And we're doing incredibly well in terms of bringing people into the category of whiskey, and whether they, sort of branch off and go here and go there. Wonderful. We always hope that they come back to us at a certain point in time or continue to drink Jura whiskey, but we're happy to be a part of that story. It's an accessible whiskey, and it's good fun, right? We're not trying to be anything that's too much more than that, which is great. Yeah.
And everyone should go and visit Jura because it's amazing.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I'm going to just finish my glass of that while we head over to Wales next, and Penderyn. Lee, thanks so much for coming on.
No worries.
We're super happy to be featuring Penderyn because you really are the kind of modern pioneers of this entire Welsh whiskey category.
Yeah.
That's a responsibility, and I think you are, you're living up to that responsibility very well. With what the liquids you're producing, and also the way in which you're communicating what Welsh whiskey should be and what it was as well in the past. And I think it's such an exciting category that you are really kind of building from scratch. And I know that there are other distilleries now that are making Welsh whiskey too, which maybe we'll get into. But tell me what it's like working for Penderyn.
It's absolutely incredible. I mean, Penderyn now is almost 22 years old, but here in Wales, at least, it feels like it's been around forever. It managed to establish itself so quickly and feel like such a stand-in part of Wales and Welsh identity. And when you look at that, it only started in the year 2000, a real sort of millennium baby. It's, for a lot of people, it's quite hard to believe. It's quite hard to believe that it's only started so recently, and for a lot of people that we were the first Welsh whiskey for 100 years. For 100 years, there was no Welsh whiskey. And yeah, that's a really good thing to say, Tristan, that we've had a lot on our shoulders to bring Welsh whiskey to the world, you know. And yeah, I like to think we've done quite a good job of that.
Yeah,
over the time.
I think the thing is, it's obviously, you know, distilleries like Jura, which have been around for a couple of centuries, or whatever. A lot of the Scotch whiskies distilleries have, and we think of them as being ancient. But if you've been in, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily want to put Penderyn in this because it does feel so much older. But if we're going to classify it as a sort of modern craft distillery, then it's effectively ancient in that context, because
I always think of us as like the old guard of the new distilleries.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you started a distillery, be it gin, whiskey, whatever, in the year 2000, you're still going, then, you know, you've nailed it, right? Because there's so many of them opening all the time now that 22 years seems like an old, well-established brand. And so, yeah, maybe might be nice to start a little bit about talking a little bit about the justification for Welsh whiskey, because a lot of people, I think, will look at a Welsh whiskey brand and go, "Oh, you're sort of jumping on the, you know, bandwagon of Ireland or Scotland or whatever." But there's history there, right?
Yeah, there is quite a bit of history and a bit of heritage with whiskey here in Wales. You know, we didn't have a real major distillery until the end of the 19th century, but you're going to see Welsh names popping up quite a lot throughout the whiskey world, and probably most predominantly you're going to see that in the United States. I mean, you know, I'm sure some of the audience here, especially on the Discovery, are going to be quite familiar with bourbons. And, you know, Evan Williams, you know, the Williams family came from Dale down in Pembrokeshire. You know, we're historically, we're not 100% sure where Evan actually fits in to that family. But, you know, they opened what is claimed to be the first distillery over in Kentucky at the end of the sort of 18th century. And, you know, the Welsh whiskey industry was not so much done because of bad product, but because of temperance. We were killed and kind of by our own people, basically, not drinking and not wanting to have whiskey, particularly produced on our own land. You know, the Royal Welsh Whiskey, the last whiskey distillery before ourselves, up in Ffrangwch, near Bala, was basically hounded out of town. They were basically handed out of town. Managed to get a 5-year-old peated malt onto the market with some pretty positive reviews at the time, but even the people working at the distillery didn't touch a drop because of how strong this temperance movement was at the time. And
it's peated whiskey they were making there, was it?
They were making peated whiskey, and they were peating it on site. They had.
Am I right in thinking that at Penderyn you've done a reproduction of that whiskey? Is that right?
Yes. We've reproduced the bottle. There are so few bottles about, I don't think we could be able to really recreate the liquid. But we've done that as a peated expression in homage to that distillery.
I've not tried that before. It's a lot of Welsh. It's beautiful labelling and packaging and everything. I've seen
it's very obviously quite retro. Yeah. You've got the lovely Welsh lady on the package as well. It's really fantastic. Yeah, and you know, that really did kill Welsh whiskey at the end of the 19th century. And then obviously monopolies on whiskey production in these other nations has kind of stopped people from having that spirit of trying to get something going until you get to the late 1990s and people basically asking the question of, why have we got this Celtic nation which isn't producing whiskey? And that's where Penderyn really started. Nice.
So what is the sort of founding story then of the distillery?
So the distillery, so it's based up in the village of Penderyn, which is a very small village. There's not much here in the village. There's a 13th century pub, an antique shop, and then opposite the distillery there's a primary school. There's not even a local shop in the village. You have to go down to the next town over. But in the local area during the 1990s, there was a group of entrepreneurial friends who used to basically get together and drink. And they used to drink in a pub down in Herwain called the Glencunnan Inn. And the more they drank and being whiskey lovers, the more they just kept asking the same question, which has come up of why there is no Welsh whiskey. And until the realization that they were going to be the guys to do it. If they were going to do it, you know, if anyone was going to do it, these were going to be the guys to do it. And luckily, Alan Evans, or Alan the Glan, as he was kind of known, because he ran the Glencunnan Inn, luckily owned a warehouse in the village of Penderyn, which happened to have a borehole in the back. So obviously quite handy if you're going to start a brand new whiskey distillery. Somewhat serendipitous that he owned this building and decided that they were going to be the guys to do it. Got all their money together and threw it into what was quite a risky venture. Back in the year 2000, as you've already hinted on, Tristan, people didn't really have faith in any whiskey distillery outside of sort of the big three countries.
Yeah. And then it's going from strength to strength, from what I understand. I mean, I've visited the original distillery a few years back, we're pushing 10 years back now. But you've got another one, and then you've got another one being built in Swansea at the moment, I think, haven't you?
Yes. So the Llandudno distillery opened up in North Wales, so in Llandudno. Actually, in the site of an old school. It's in Old Victoria. We've managed to shove a still inside there. And they've started running with our unique style of still, the Faraday still, and running peated malt through that to try and create a different style of spirit. They've been running their still for a year now, so we haven't actually got any whiskey to bring to the public as of yet, but it's exciting times going into the future. And then down in Swansea, we're going to have a third distillery with the same production capacity as we've got up here in the Brecon Beacons to really increase the not only the production of Penderyn, but as you've hinted on, Welsh whiskey. Welsh whiskey is now becoming more, or Wales is becoming more of a whiskey producing region rather than just ourselves up here in the Brecons.
And so you mentioned that the one in, I'm going to attempt some Welsh pronunciation, Llandudno, is produced, that wasn't bad, was it? You wouldn't, you'd never know. I only rehearsed it 10 times before the conversation. That's producing peated, but in the same kind of Faraday type still. Maybe we should talk about Faraday stills in a second. And then Swansea is going to be producing another sort of mark or type of expression in addition to that, is it?
Yeah, so we're going to have that much as a blank canvas, and really allow our distillers to experiment on the distillation side, and possibly even expand outside that single malt category and start expanding with different types of grain as well. Penderyn has been a fantastic success, and as we'll come to with the whiskey we're going to show your subscribers today, we've had a lot of fun experiment with different cask types. But because we've had to keep filling casks as a new distillery, we haven't been able to experiment as much on the distillation side. So Swansea is going to give us that opportunity to do that.
Nice. So yeah, on distillation, I think we included a little bit of information on this on the tasting card about the Faraday still. But maybe just give us a primer on it, exactly what that is, and who the guy is that designed it.
Yeah, so the Faraday still is a still which is completely unique to ourselves here at Penderyn, and it does a single distillation. So it's got a pot like a standard still, and then it'll have two columns attached to that pot. And what that does is it allows us to produce an incredibly high alcohol spirit. But in this batch process, what we can do is we can push a lot of flavor back into that. So the cut points we're taking out of those Faraday stills are between 89 and 92% alcohol, which is an industry high. But when you get to taste that new make, and obviously, unfortunately, we haven't got any to show yourselves today, or I don't know if Tristan, you might have tried it before. What you get is something which is insanely light, insanely delicate, but with a huge punch of sweetness and a lovely sort of orchard fruit flavor in there. It's got all those pears, all those apples still locked in there in something which feels like it should have everything else stripped away from it. Yeah. And obviously at that high alcohol, it's very pure. And this still was designed, and the people who started Penderyn worked quite closely with Dr. David Faraday. And I'm sure, as you're probably wondering, David is a direct descendant of Michael Faraday, the very famous physicist from the Victorian era. So he's obviously stayed in the family, but biochemistry was his jam.
Pretty cool backstory of your still designer. Out of interest, is David Faraday still in the kind of business of designing equipment for distilleries and breweries and that kind of thing, or is this one-off favor? Someone just sort of pull in a favor? I happen to know that the great grandson of Faraday. The
still was brought to us. It was already constructed. It was part of a project that he did, but he helped us to basically dial it in, to get it, wrangle it, to create something that that we could really produce with it. I think he's quite in an advanced age now. I don't think he's really in the game anymore.
He's probably got a son or a grandson though, who's some kind of genius in some other field. So maybe...
Oh yeah, in a few years there'll be another industry which is,
Tristan is begging for an invite.
Yeah.
An introduction. Yeah, Tristan's literally begging for it. Come on, make it happen.
Always welcome. Always welcome.
But I understand you've got some more traditional, more like Scotch type pot stills installed as well now, right?
Yeah, so we have 2 Faradays now. So you visited 10 years ago? So
yeah, probably about that, yeah.
Yeah. So you might have just had the original Faraday then that was there. But since then, we've really expanded what we can do at the Brecons. So one, we brought in another Faraday, which has allowed us to double the amount of barrels that we can fill with that spirit. But then 2014, we brought in a more traditional pair of copper pot stills. And the idea being that we can create basically a contrasting style of spirit, something which is, it's very similar character-wise in terms of its flavor, but has a different texture. And then what that does is it gives our blender, Eyster, a lot more flexibility in the sort of whiskies that we can bring together going into the future, but still keep that Penderyn character. Yeah.
So we're tasting Portwood at the moment. Would you think it's likely that actually, when were the pot stills installed? Are they how long ago was that?
2014. 2014. Right, so we are seeing some whiskies coming from it now. It's been a while to get to that point. Some of our Faraday stuff very young could be fantastic. With the pot still spirit, it does take that little extra time. We're finally starting to see those whiskies kind of feed in through and get incorporated into ours. But what you're going to be tasting today will be coming from the Faradays. What you're going to be tasting from your pouches, cool.
All right. Well, maybe let's move on to Portwood then.
Yeah.
Beautiful bottles, by the way, because there was a packaging refresh done not that long ago, right?
Yeah. So we get a lot of compliments on the bottles. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. Only that they're a bit tall for people's shelves, but a lot of people do like our bottles.
Or if you dropped it on yourself.
Yeah. Do be careful, everyone. So the bottles are something we're really proud of. They were actually designed by a gentleman by the name of Glenn Tutzel, and he was the same person who had the Peroni glassware contract here in the UK, and you can really see a kind of artistic tinge going through a lot of his kind of work. And we did that redesign in 2018. Up until then, we were pretty much just using old wine bottles because that's the most available ones you can get. And
sure.
But what we got here, we got Portwood. We're gonna be trying today. Try and do that on the screen.
Yeah, I've got some poured out already. We tried to get some to Mark, but there's no such thing as Amazon Prime on Jura. That's
Lee forgot to send me some, basically.
Oh, hang on a minute.
Or Lee.
I don't think you need to put this on me,
here, right? It just takes a little bit longer.
Well, you've got an open invitation down to the Brecon Beacons now, Mark, so you can go and see some other hills with a distillery next to them.
That's a granted, right? Yeah, we're on the same chat. So I've got open invitation down to see you, Lee, and I've got open invitation to all BlackRock sites as well when I get back down to London. So there you go.
Cool. So Portwood. It's aged in port casks, right? What? Tell us a little bit about that, because you do a sherry wood one as well, right? So there's a Madeira one as well, isn't there? Madeira.
Yeah. So the original, I got it back here. So this was actually the original whiskey that we released, which is our Madeira cask finish. So in 2004, that was the first time that Welsh whiskey was on the shelves again for 100 years. And along with those Faraday stills, we really wanted to set ourselves apart with a sort of different cask finish to go for with a house style. And working with the quite legendary distiller, Dr. Jim Swan, he was really keen on us using Madeira wine casks as a kind of house style to really kind of set ourselves apart. But at that same time, we were bringing in lots of other styles of cask to basically try and see what would happen, see how our new make would play with different sort of flavors. So we'll always build up a base of flavor in American white oak cask, much like at Jura, pulling mostly from Buffalo Trace Distillery, to build up that sort of toffee, vanilla, sort of cream fudge base, along with our sort of fruity new make spirit. And then what we're going to do is we're going to chuck that into another cask after a few years of maturation. One of the most successful ones has been our Ruby Port caskings. From the early days, we knew these were going to be quite special for us. We first started releasing this whiskey about 2011. This came onto the market as what would be known as sort of Penderyn Portwood 41. But that was unfortunately just for the export market. So especially our biggest importers, which are the French. But after a few years, we decided to incorporate it into what we'd call our gold range of whiskies, all sitting at 46% alcohol with different cask finishes, Madeira being our flagship. Sherry, we do a peated style as well. But the Portwood is really something special that we introduced, and well, let's all have a taste, right?
Let's go for it. I always think port casks are an interesting one because most people know what port tastes like. They can kind of visualize that flavor. When you talk about Madeira and sherry, for a lot of people, they're like, well, I kind of know it's usually a sweet wine, that kind of thing. With port, everyone's like, oh yeah, red fruit, like dark fruit, berries, all that kind of thing. And so it actually clicks with people quite well because they know what to look out for or what to expect. However, you don't necessarily get them in a port cask finished whiskey, so it can sometimes sort of go the other way,
I think you're right. I think that's a really good point. A lot of people, when they see a port cask whiskey, they're looking for something bright red and quite juicy, but at 40% alcohol.
Yeah.
And I think our expression is really not that.
No.
You do get red berry notes, but they're more like dried red berries, dried sort of cranberries. You get a lot of nuttiness from the style of cask that is used. You do get a richness that you might associate with port, but combined with that American white oak, it's more sort of your fudge, your salted caramel kind of richness that you're going to kind of get. But yeah, I think it's
I'm getting a bit of banana off it today. Do you ever get that? Yeah. It's got some of that kind of banana, like banana.
Kind of banana, yeah.
Yeah. Mark, important question. Don't want to embarrass anyone, but do they stock any Penderyn in the pub in Craighouse on Jura?
No chance.
No chance. Fair enough.
No chance. It's all Jura whiskey.
Okay.
And there's some exceptions for people's favorites that they ask in. Some of the men and women that live here, and they'll have their favorites and bring it in. But it's very much a Jura fan base here on the island. It's not to say that Penderyn stuff is not amazing, because I've had the chance of trying it many times before, and I'm a big fan, Lee. So I've been
it's a surprising following we have in Scotland, which is an incredible praise for
good,
Penderyn, which is fantastic. And even at the distillery, we're employing quite a few Scots people living here in South Wales, which always does good with the particular snobbery of that you often find. Even to this day, But
we're getting some tasting notes coming through from something else. I forgot to put any tasting notes up for Jura, but maybe I'll bring some up at the end. So this is Penderyn, pancakes and syrup on the nose. Nice. Very much like drinking a fun maple syrup.
I'll take that one.
Yeah. What we got here? Always drink port with 70% chocolate. Wow. Just tried with Portwood. Wow. Toffee, honeycomb, and caramels. There you go.
Yeah, it's that richness, A lot of our whiskies are known for being very light, very delicate kind of whiskies with delicate sort of lighter, particularly those orchard fruit flavors. But with our Portwood, we really ramped up that sort of toffee fudge background that you get using the port casks. And again, as Tristan was saying, it's quite a surprise that it doesn't come across as something quite juicy.
Yeah, that color though. I don't know, just the light of this room, but it's not so evident. I mean, obviously, it's quite a little bit red in the bottom, darker, certainly the Madeira cask. But when you put it in a glass and there's less liquid there, it's certainly got a kind of pink tint to it, hasn't it?
Yeah. Pink rose gold is another color that often comes through. A lot of people will name it as. Yeah, it is beautiful. And, at the distillery, when people see that on the shelves and all they've ever seen is our light, bright sort of gold, Welsh gold, Our Cymru, Madeira, it can be quite striking, that color, and it really does attract a lot of people.
Yeah. No, it's delicious. I really like it. And I would highly recommend the Madeira one as well. which, like you say, it's your original whiskey, and it's a really good dram, that, I think.
Yeah, it's always surprising when you do tastings with people and you give them everything fancy in the world. You give them the most expensive special single cask, which, you know, there's only 3 bottles of left in existence, and there's a real compliment when they still go out to the distillery holding a bottle of Madeira, because, you know, that's our house style. That's what we show to the world, and it's something which we've, you know, incorporated better casks in over the years to really kind of improve it, and, you know, it's definitely shown.
Yeah. Just to make things clear, here's a tasting note from Jura, just so we
Good.
A lot going on. Every sip reveals something new, quite complex in a simple, non-confusing way. There you go. Approachable, but with layers of complexity. That's a nice way to describe 7wood, I think, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Totally agree.
And someone agreed with Bill agreed with Lee on the cognac Armagnac back taste, fruity and French. Yeah. Well, oh yeah, remember, if anyone wants to buy a bottle, both of these are for sale in the Whiskey Me shop and 10% off with the discount code Whiskey Me Club 10. Gents, any closing thoughts? I think both those whiskies are fantastic. Really enjoyed them, and your descriptions of them, and the insight into the distilleries and the operation.
Nothing from me, mate. Just to say it's been an absolute pleasure, you know, sort of to join you both and understand Penderyn a lot more, and to be able to share the story of Jura whiskey. So absolute pleasure. And thank you for everyone for coming along as well.
Yeah, I can only echo those thoughts. You know, it'll be great to see you down at the distillery, Mark, and I really do hope to head up to Jura and continue my love affair with the Scotch whiskey as well. You know,
come see me.
Good.
For sure. Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. And thank you, everyone, for watching. We will see you next month.